Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back, everybody, staff. The meeting of the CDBG is called to order at 2:36. Roll call, please.
Sure. Committee members: Armenian.
Present.
Avedisian.
Present.
Garibian.
Here.
Kazarian.
Present.
Chair Ramirez.
Here.
The agenda for the October 22nd, 2018 meeting of the CDBG Advisory Committee was posted on or before Friday, October 19, 2018 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Item 2, minutes. At A, approval of the minutes of the August 13, 2018 CDBG Advisory Committee meeting.
All right. Everybody read the minutes? Motion to approve?
Make a motion to approve. Second.
Made.
Committee members: Armenian.
Sure.
Avedisian.
Yes.
Garibian.
Yes.
Kazarian.
Yes.
Chair Ramirez.
Absent.
Item 3, oral communications. I don't have any cards. Item 4, at A, reports for information only. At 1, report regarding benchmark study of cities' CDBG criteria for agency financial solvency.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Today we have before you a benchmark study report that was requested at the last CDBG Advisory Committee meeting regarding the city's Audit Committee inquiry on ratios discussion. The committee asked staff to conduct a benchmark study of other cities to see how they gauge their financial solvency in their own CDBG operations. We reached out to 7 cities and received feedback from 4 cities, Burbank, El Monte, Fullerton, and San Bernardino. And we have a visual for you. If you could please draw your attention to the screen, we'll present that to you right now. So as you can see on the screen, we tried to break it down to make it a bit simpler to see how each city does business, basically. So the populations of the cities that participated are pretty similar to the city of Glendale, and their funding amounts, their entitlements for CDBG are similar, except for, I would say, San Bernardino, which gets quite a bit more at 3.3, almost 3.4 million. And then if you look over at our CDBG dollars that are distributed, it's interesting as well. We noticed that Glendale is more community and nonprofit centered, with almost 60% of projects being awarded to local area nonprofits. And if you look over at El Monte, for example, 100% of CDBG entitlement goes to city projects only. Fullerton, 74% go to city projects. San Bernardino, 87%. City of Burbank is pretty close to what City of Glendale does and how we do business here. But with City of Burbank, most of their projects are social services centered. And then if you look at the financial statement requested prior to funding, and you'll see that City of Glendale requests 2 years of financial statements. City of Burbank does not request it, but they review 2 years of financial statements at the end of their fiscal year when they do their monitoring. Again, El Monte is an NA because it's all city projects. City of Fullerton also requests financial statements prior to funding, but only 1 year's worth. City of San Bernardino, again, requests financial statements, and again, 1 year's worth. If you look at the prerequisites for HUD, it's pretty concrete. Everyone has to meet those national objectives, so that's pretty much a given. Now, if you look at the city's prerequisites, City of Glendale has more stringent criteria than the other cities. Of course, we have the HUD prerequisites, along with 2 years financials, board minutes, payroll taxes, and of course now the ratio calculator, which we're going to be implementing. City of Burbank, City of El Monte all had prerequisites, and Fullerton is the only one that requests 1 year prior to funding, financial statements prior to funding. So if you look at the guidelines for evaluating CDBG funding up there, For Glendale, obviously, we look at financial solvency, program priorities, history of success, of course. Thank you. And for Burbank, it's program priorities and history of success. Fullerton, program priorities, history of success, but with multiple contractual obligations. So if the city, if the nonprofit has more than one project, they prefer those types of nonprofits, as does San Bernardino, working with their nonprofits. Now, who completes the HUD required end-of-year monitoring? Because that is a requirement. For Glendale, it's basically myself and Ms. Armina Hunanian who complete it, so it is the CDBG staff. For Burbank, again, it's CDBG staff. For Fullerton, it's actually their finance department that complete the end-of-the-year monitoring. And for San Bernardino, because it is a much larger entitlement, it's CDBG staff along with finance staff that complete their end-of-the-year monitoring, where the CDBG staff do a desktop monitoring and the finance staff actually go out to the agencies and do the full end-of-year fiscal monitoring. So what types of financial tools are used to measure solvency? And again, in Glendale, we have our 2 years financial statements and our soon-to-be ratio calculation tool that's going to be implemented by the agencies. For Burbank, it's the financial statements, which are reviewed at the end of the year for program and finance monitoring, and then they report back to the committee to give that information. Fullerton, again, end of the year program financial monitoring by the finance department, and that determines program success and then report back to the committee. And it's the same for San Bernardino. So this is our benchmark study that we conducted to give you an overview of how other cities do business in CDBG. That concludes the presentation.
Does it answer all of your questions?
So, I mean, what I'm gathering from your report is, there doesn't seem to be anything creative or anything different than what we're already doing, number one. Number two, we seem to be in alignment with what others are doing.
Absolutely. I think we ask for more because we give more, and that is a liability, of course. That's really what we gathered. Again, we have been in trouble before, and we want to make sure that doesn't happen again. So I think those are the reasons these tools are put in place.
Any other questions?
I think safety measures, yeah, we are stricter, but I think it's a safety measure. I think we should keep it that way. As far as towards the end of financial reporting, I think we are easygoing because some of the cities, I think it was Fullerton, goes back to the city for financial audit in the end of the project, isn't it? Which we don't do that, I guess. That's what you guys do, but.
Actually, are you talking about the end-of-the-year monitoring? End-of-the-year monitoring is a requirement of HUD, but the CDBG staff doesn't do it in Fullerton. It's their finance department that does the actual monitoring, which is kind of nice because it's a checks and balances, because CDBG staff, and I know we've discussed this, CDBG staff has a soft spot for the agencies because we work with them all year round. So we want them to do well. We want them to succeed. And it's not that finance department doesn't, but they're going to see things we don't see. So we thought that was interesting.
Fresh eyes.
And as we
Absolutely.
saw, most of them go to city projects in the other cases, so that makes it easier for them too, versus ours is more to public. So I think I'm happy with the report and everything else you did. Great job.
Do you think that our finance department will have an issue, or do you think it's something that's doable within our city?
I'm going to defer to Armina Hunanian because back in the day, I think we used to do that. Armina?
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. That's very true. Previous years, I would say maybe 4 to 5 years ago, the staff would do the program monitoring and the finance department would do our finance monitoring. So that was how it was dealt with a lot of our grant projects. And then there was a transition with that. Within that transition, CDBG took full responsibility of both finance and program monitoring.
So is that satisfactory?
It is up to the commission to
It's
let
up
us
to you
know.
guys.
I think I would
Committee?
like fresh ice.
Chair Ramirez, members of the commission, I think it always comes down to resources. So, of course, it's at the will of the committee if that's what you guys want us to look into, but that's not something that we would be able to. We'd have to talk to the finance director and see what that entails. And of course, the staff resources, whether they do have the staff to be able to take additional tasks on as far as being able to help staff do the actual financial monitoring at the sites. It would have to be a discussion and come back, but I think it has been working fine since the transition with CDBG staff taking it on. But of course, it's at the will of the committee. If that's something you want us to look into, we'd be happy to talk to them and come back. But I think we have been okay in the last few years since the transition. So we'll take direction from the committee.
Well, I caught a couple of things that I thought should have been caught and weren't. I think I mentioned that to you. But what's your pleasure?
I mean, I think, some of the grants we've been giving, especially year over year, have increased the stakes in terms of amounts. And maybe there's a dollar threshold that we could use that might, once a grant level exceeds a certain dollar amount, it triggers greater scrutiny. So, for example, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with this organization, but we've given a significant amount of money in the last 2 cycles to YWCA. And so, that certainly to me, it's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think it's over $400,000 at this point. So to me, those levels warrant greater scrutiny to ensure that, things are solvent. And I'm not just talking, I think there's, maybe I want to go a little bit more macro. I think that it's not just about the financial solvency at that level to me, it's also the organizational solvency, if you will, which is, does the organization have the capacity to manage, projects to scale? As the numbers increase, it means a greater magnitude to the projects themselves. And, we want these things to be successful. We want them to be done in a timely manner, not drag on for years. Home Minutemen is another example. Year over year, if you look at the amount of grants that, pile up. And so to me, these things warrant a closer look. And so I don't know if we have a differentiation like that way, if you are going to apply or need greater resources, let's say from the finance department, it's not across, a dozen organizations, it's kind of it's more along the process, not just looking at it in the moment when you're giving the grant, which we have a certain methodology, but along the way too, to ensure that the money, CDBG staff manages the actual work, but I think from a larger perspective, the organizational solvency, the financial solvency of the organization, 2 different things, might be warranted in cases where grants exceed a certain amount. Just a thought.
Anybody want to weigh in?
You go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, adding more staff time, especially if we can or cannot, that's a different issue. But also putting something on the limitations, we don't want to step on anybody's toes as far as dollar amount, because that's relevant to the project and size of the agency also. So maybe 500 for an agency, it's a small token of change, or somebody could be large. So that's a fine line to walk on. I'm willing to look into it, but I think it's too early for us to even come up. I can't even give you a suggestion what it is, except put our thoughts into it and see if we can come up with something just to put a safety net. I mean, I agree with all of them, but we just want to make sure we walk a fine line so we won't pass that line.
Well, we asked for the benchmark, and other cities are doing this, and there must be a reason, and we've done it in the past, so it's not like it's not one of our past practice.
Well, Chair Ramirez, we could always look into it and come back. So we'll be happy to do that. It sounds like the majority have given consensus to come back with some sort of, look into it and come back with some sort of report.
I mean, I think the issue we're trying to solve to, or the problem we're trying to solve, is to prevent what's happened in the future, which we continue to pay the price for today. So, you know, anything we can do that helps ensure against that sort of situation reoccurring, I think is within the bounds of what our responsibility is, not only as a advisory committee, but also as a city.
As taxpayers, too. Okay, next item.
Next is item 4A2, report regarding ratio tool implementation plan for agencies applying for CDBG funding.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, at the last CDBG Advisory Committee meeting, the Audit Committee asked for your input on the usefulness of the ratio calculations tool in making CDBG funding recommendations. This report provides the feedback given by the CDBG Advisory Committee to put together a plan to implement the ratio tool for fiscal year 1920. So the Innovation Performance and Audit Department created a financial ratio tool that we are including in the 2019-2020 request for proposal packets. And then the financial ratios have been reduced from 6 to 3, which includes the debt ratio, defensive interval, and the reliance on source income that we're keeping. There will also be a disclaimer that the ratios are provided by the agencies and are not calculated by CSP staff. And CSP staff is not liable for the ratio accuracy because they are going to be turned in by the agencies themselves. We will be demonstrating the ratio tool at the technical support meeting for agencies in attendance in late November, since this will be a new requirement for them and it's also a work in progress for us. And then the financial ratio tool will be reevaluated next program cycle to decide the effectiveness, continuation, modification, or to even explore other options if possible. In our audience today is our IPA team with our director, Elena Bolbolian, who's here. And the IPA staff conducted a training with our CDBG and CSP staff on how to plug in and track the ratio numbers and consolidate them into the summary report to include in your February proposal packets. So you'll be receiving that in February as a first-time experiment, as we can say. On the screen for you, we have the ratio tool that's going to be provided to the agencies submitting the proposal. So this will be the agency's, well, not the agency itself, but the agency's accountant who will be completing this portion. And then they'll be returning it back with the proposals. And then once the document is submitted back, the CDBG staff will enter all that information into a summary sheet, and we're going to get you to the summary sheet. So what we'll do is we'll plug in those numbers, and then you'll have this complete consolidated summary sheet for your viewing pleasure. We didn't want to put the names of the agencies, so you're going to see agency 1 through, I think, 12. But it'll kind of give you a way to look at the ratios. So those are the three, the debt ratio, the defensive interval, and reliance on source of income. So expect those in February in your packets. If you have any other questions?
So the trend line, what does a good trend line look like?
We defer to IPA.
What would a good trend line look like in your opinion?
Good afternoon, CDBG Commission members. The tool as designed by our auditors, I do not have financial background, so I will walk you through this, and if there's anything specific, I brought Natalie and Ami Vildavia with me. So we took the last 3 years worth of data for each of the agencies and plugged it in. And so the trend line, for example, in the first one, should be trending upwards, so that if CDBG staff are entering this information and they see the trend line going down, that's a red flag to them to follow up. So the trend line is intended to be a rule of thumb, and if you notice, some of the cells are marked in red. So this Excel sheet has been programmed so that if there is a ratio that's out of this rule of thumb, it'll highlight that cell in red to, again, automatically
And so,
flag.
are we talking about the debt trend line or the defensive interval trend line? Which one
She's
are-
done that for all three of them. So
Okay.
all three of them have the trend line next to the agency for the last 3 years worth of data, and the red cells, that's been programmed for all three of the ratios.
So, back to my question, a line going down is a good thing, because that means your debt to income ratio is decreasing? Like you're getting into better financial shape?
In which example?
Any of them, doesn't matter which one you want to pick. Because you got multiple ones where it shows debt going, where the trend line is going down,
Right.
right? Let's like,
Right.
if we look at agency,
Right.
2, 3, 4, 5,
Yes.
they're all, the
Yeah.
trend's going down,
So
right?
in this agency too would be, why is it going down? So looking further into that.
But that's a good thing, right?
Yeah, they should
Committee
all be
member
going down.
Armenian, I think it depends on the ratio you're looking at. So the very first ratio, which is the debt ratio,
that's
the
what I'm talking
lower
about.
is better. So the rule of thumb that we would be using is 1, meaning that anything less is obviously better. So what staff puts in the red if ratio is greater than, so right now we have a 1. So we want basically the Excel worksheet to tell us any agency that's higher than 1, because the lower the ratio, the better it is, that their debt is lower than the amount of
Right.
assets or the liabilities are lower than the assets they have. So in that case, it should be trending downward. For the second one, which is the defensive interval, the higher it is, the better, because it just means that they're able to sustain themselves. So in that case, it would be the
Going up.
So it just depends on what which one you're
So
looking
if
at.
we look at the debt ratio, agency 1, it shows went down, but it's going up. But that's not marked in red.
Which one?
Agency 1, debt ratio.
Less than 1, that's
It's
why.
Agency 1, in 2015, it was 0.20. In 2016, it's 0.16. So anything less than 1 is not a red flag.
Okay.
It just means that the liabilities are lower than are lower than the assets, so it's not an issue. As soon as your liabilities are greater than your assets, it'll be 1 point something, so it'll be greater than 1, so it'll flag it as a red flag for us. So obviously, the key is so that the assets are greater than the liabilities, and which is why we look at 1 being the ratio as the measure. For the second one, it really depends on staff and how we want to measure it, or even committee direction. The way that we see it is just rule of thumb, 3 months. So will an agency be able to sustain themselves if they were to get no more income? And in this case, for example, for the first agency, it shows that they would be able to sustain themselves for 3 months. Should they have no more income coming in, because their set expenses are a specific amount. So it just depends on how we are evaluating it. If we were to increase that to 5 months, if we were to say that we would feel more comfortable knowing that an agency can sustain themselves for 5 months without 0 income coming in, additional income, then we would up that 3 to a 5. If we were to say we're comfortable with it being 2 months, then we would lower that 3 to 2. So it just depends on where we set it. Right now, staff feels that 3 months is, in general, I think the rule of thumb is 3 months is okay. So if they stop getting any money in, they can sustain themselves for 3 months until they figure out how to bring in additional income. So that's kind of how we would look at this. And I think the longer we track it, obviously it'd be easier to read the trend lines. But right now, that's kind of how we would use this tool to evaluate.
I think it says that on like agency number 3, because that should be up because third year is not there, but because it's not applicable, I guess you guys just put it downwards.
Yeah, the
on
trend line's
debt ratio.
wrong.
Because there's no, yeah,
There's
because
no-
the third year, there's no
right.
data in there. It just trends down, but if there was,
It should be up technically because from 1 to 2 went up, and then third one is
Yeah.
just blank on agency 3.
Because it's based on
well,
less
it
data.
went down a little, so it was 2.28 and then 2.15.
No, I'm sorry, I look at debt ratio on agency 3.
Oh, debt ratio,
Yeah,
yes.
From 41 to 43, so it should trend upwards, but because
It
there's
is,
no
if you could
data-
barely tell that
Yeah.
when you look at the straight line portion, it's trending a little up because it's such a small difference, 0.41 versus 0.43. But then because it's NA, it just drops real quick, so yeah. If there was a number in that third cell, then you would see it either trending a little higher or coming back down. But because it's NA, it just seems like it's dropping. So that's why I think you just, as we build a couple years worth of data, it'll be easier to look at the trend line. But in the meantime, I think the ratios as they were provided even prior to when IPA was doing the analysis would be able to, we would look at the ratios as it's presented, because that's kind of what you had as a committee to review and analyze before as well. I think the trend line is a new feature that they added to just make it visually easier to see. But of course, unless it's complete data, it's going to distort it. So this is just an example that staff wanted to present to you, what you would be seeing as part of the packet. So as CDBG collects the information after the proposals are submitted, we will gather all the information and put it into this document. But what we as staff will receive is the other document. Iris, can you toggle back to the other worksheet, please? So this is something staff will present to you after we input all the information, but this is the document that the agencies will be filling out, the agency's accountant. So the areas that are highlighted in orange are the areas that the agencies are going to fill out, working with their accountants. And so because IPA used to do this, CDBG staff are really not accountants or finance major, so I think with direction from the committee, we said that the accountants can provide this information. So what our staff would do is, as you can see in the agency formula section, where it says page numbers and agency formula, the accountant is going to have to identify the page numbers within the financial statements where they're pulling information, the numbers that they need to add together to compile the ratios. So our staff would be able to go back to the page number to make sure that they're adding the right numbers to get to the ratio. But because we are not accountants and we're depending on the accountant who is going to sign off on this to present the information, we would only be able to go back to the financial statement page number to verify that they added the numbers correctly. And so that's what we're depending on, is for the agencies to provide this information. And there's, I believe, 2 or 3 years worth of 2 years worth of information that we're requesting, or 3 years worth of information that we're requesting.
But 2
It
years.
was what we
but-
require.
Well, it's 2 years of information, but most of the agencies are returned, so we have the backup data for them. Yeah.
So the agencies are liable for the accuracy.
Correct. It's just, as far as the financials go, every agency is different in the way that they categorize their expenses and liabilities and revenues and all of that. And so we would be depending on the agencies to accurately display or calculate what their total liabilities are, what their total assets are. So that's where we would be depending on them to provide that information to staff. We would be able to go back based on the page numbers that they provided to make sure that the numbers that they're adding together are accurate. But
That's why we have the disclaimer then.
correct.
Okay, any questions? Any other questions? That's pretty thorough. Okay, we can go on to the next item then. Thank you so much.
Item 4B, action items. At 1 is selection of new chair and vice chair.
Okay, this goes back to you, right?
Yes. Okay, the business before the CDBG Advisory Committee is the selection of a new chair. I will now entertain nominations for that office.
Before we go on to that question, What has been our normal practice in terms of, does the vice chair move up to chair, or has there been no
We've always.
trend?
Oh, sorry. Chair Ramirez, Committee Member Armenian, this has been the standard practice is to follow this, this procedure. So not necessarily has the vice chair moved up. It's been based on nominations.
Okay, thank you.
Nominations are open. Can I make a nomination to move up our vice president? I think that's proper protocol.
So I have one nomination for Committee Member Armenian for the office of chair. Are there any additional nominations?
The only thing I would,
Go ahead, sorry.
no, the only thing I was going to say that we have two people who have not served in that capacity on this particular committee. One is Commissioner Ronnie Garibian, and one is Norik, so I don't know if there's interest there.
We don't need a second.
I was going to, Madam Chair, I was going to say the same thing, that we have two commissioners that they haven't been a chair, haven't had the opportunity. I don't know how everybody else is it. Maybe we should offer it and then see what happens. But at the same time, if they're ready to take on, I guess,
We'll
would
make
be.
a nomination.
What was your name? I would nominate Rani Garibian for chair.
I'm sorry, just to clarify, you said Caribbean or?
Ronnie Garibian, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't hear very well. Okay, so we have one
Isn't it not your
nomination
name?
for Committee Member Armenian and one nomination for Committee Member Caribbean. I will take a roll call and just state the name of the person who you wish to vote for.
Can we do it separate vote for each one?
We could go outside of the standard practice for the city if you wish.
What is your pleasure?
However, I just would like to explain that if we take, let's say for instance, Armenian first, then if 3 people vote for him, he automatically gets voted in. So that means that we would no longer proceed with the second roll call. So that's typically why we do both at the same time, so that we can get 3. Whoever gets 3 is basically voted in. So I just wanted to explain.
Very evenly.
When we take a vote, if there's
that
3, then
Very
that's who
evenly.
stays.
Yeah, okay. That sits with everyone? Go ahead.
So we're taking both at the same time? Okay. So I'll take roll call and just state the name of the person. Committee Member Armenian,
I'm going to abstain since I'm a candidate.
Committee Member Avedisian,
Garibian,
Committee Member Garibian,
Also abstain because I'm a
Committee Member Gazarian,
Armenian.
and Committee Member Ramirez.
I would like to consider Ronnie over there, but I'll stay with Committee Member Armenian.
So now we have 2 votes for Armenian and 1 for Garibian, and so that means that we don't have a quorum. So we need to have a quorum in order to vote somebody in.
Majority, you mean? We have 3 for Armenian, don't we?
2.
Because
Two and
but
two. Oh, you
2 of them.
Yeah,
the
it's
two-
Because they're both
Abstained.
abstaining.
What does that mean?
Abstaining? Well, it just means I'm a candidate, so I'm not going to vote for myself.
Do them separate.
If you're,
Maybe.
you want me to take the roll separately? I don't know if it's gonna, the same thing's gonna happen.
Yep, take it separately, because there's still going to be abstentions, right?
Happens. Okay, so this is,
We'll make it
This
interesting.
is cause,
Yeah.
yeah, this is trouble
let's
now.
shake things up a bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so this is a motion to, for Committee Member Armenian to become the
Can
chair.
I ask you one quick question? Sorry to
Sure.
interrupt. Do they have to abstain, either one of them?
No, they don't. If they're interested in the position, then they can absolutely say, yeah, that they want to be, so they can state their name.
Okay. Thank you. I just want to make sure that they don't have to be abstain
They don't
or
have-
abstaining.
Very good.
Or they could vote for the other person as well. Yeah. Okay, committee member Armenian,
This is the vote for me.
or you, so yes or no?
I'm going to abstain.
Okay. Committee member Avedisian,
Caribbean?
so you're saying no to Armenian?
Oh, no.
No, okay. Committee member Caribbean,
That's a tough position to put in. I'll abstain also.
We're same place then.
then we will end up with the same vote, I'm
Unless somebody
afraid.
changes.
Committee member Gazarian,
Armenian.
so yes. Okay. Committee member Ramirez.
Yes,
Okay. So we have, of course, we have the same, so
we have the same.
we'll,
Somebody's not going to have to abstain.
Or change the vote.
Well, wait a minute. No, we just voted on me. Now you run it for
okay,
Garibian.
we'll run it. Okay, so now is for Caribbean to be voted as the chair. Committee member Armenian,
Garibian.
so yes. Committee member Avedisian,
Yes.
committee member Caribbean,
I'm staying on this.
okay? Committee member Gazarian,
Caribbean.
so
Yes.
yes. Okay. Committee member Ramirez,
Caribbean.
so yes. Okay, so now we had 3 yeses, so that means that I now declare committee member Caribbean the duly elected chair of the CDBG Advisory Committee. So, Mr. Chair, the task before you now is to open the floor for nominations for vice chair.
Nomination is open for vice chair.
Anybody?
Do we have to nominate?
Would you like to be vice chair?
Go ahead,
Anybody?
you should.
Armenian.
Sorry?
Any nominations?
Nominate,
Armenian.
Armenian.
You have a nomination for Mr. Armenia? Anyone seconding that? Any other nominations?
you don't need a second.
Any
I-
other
I
nominations?
would like to nominate, but I can't
doesn't
get your
want
number.
to.
He doesn't want to?
He doesn't want to, that's
You
why I
have to
just
learn.
asked him.
This is a good way to learn. No?
No?
Okay.
Any other nominations?
Vote, nominate Armika Vedisian.
Mr. Ramirez? It's your,
Well, you have 2 nominations. That's
right,
it.
it's
That's
up.
all you need, right? And we vote on the 2.
If there were a third one, you could do it as well. But still, you'd need 3 votes to vote somebody in, so.
Yeah.
Roll call.
So you will state either Armenian or Avedisian. Committee member Armenian,
Vedisian.
okay? Committee member Avedisian,
I guess I'll have to abstain.
okay?
Rashid.
Committee member Caribbean,
Avedisia.
sorry?
Avedisia.
Okay, thank you. Committee member Gazarian,
Avedisian.
okay? And committee member Ramirez,
Avedisian.
okay?
Took care of that.
So I now declare committee member Avedisian the duly elected vice chair of the CDBG Advisory Committee.
Very good. Do you want to trade places?
Sure.
Your bag, I don't want to take that one. Where's mine?
Yours?
No, mine's right here. Okay. That was fast. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Well, first, I would like to thank Ms. Ramirez for your leadership for the last 1 year. She did a great job. Very happy the way she controlled the committee. managed it properly. I love it. So it was great, and thank you for the opportunity from my fellow members and the staff. We're looking forward for a great year. Hopefully, we'll get to keep more agencies happy this year. I think we got more coming up, hopefully, and of course, our funding size didn't change much, and hopefully be a better year. So let's move on with the business and what's on the agenda.
Sure, the next item is 4B2, review and approve fiscal year 2019-20 CDBG program priorities. At A is a motion to approve the fiscal year 2019-20 CDBG program priorities.
Mr. Chair, committee members, I wanted to defer this report to Armine Hunanian, who coordinated the program priorities report at the September 20th community meeting that we had at Pacific Park. So I'm going to turn this over to her so she could tell you about our program priorities for fiscal year 19-20.
Chair Garibian and committee members, we wanted to give you a brief summary of the program priorities we proposed for fiscal year 19 and 20, as they haven't changed drastically. Staff held a community meeting at Pacific Park on September 20th, 2018, with park staff from CDBG, homeless services, recreation, senior services, and we coordinated a meeting with Glendale PD, housing, and code enforcement staff, assisting the attendees with questions as they came up during the breakout session, which were held in English, Armenian, and Spanish. Two of our committee members were also in attendance, Ms. Ramirez and Mr. Garibian. We thank you for your time and your input on that day. We gathered community input along with demographic analysis, including the key demo indicators as poverty, age, and income levels. Based on the evaluations, staff determined that the needs and priorities expressed by the community, corroborated by the census data, continue to be consistent with current and 5-year program priorities. However, the residents have commented that the housing concerns continue to increase, and residents have expressed a need for additional youth, employment, and senior services. With that said, we have also given a comprehensive report of all the program priorities that we currently have, and the comments from the community in your packets. I would like to open any discussions or any questions you may have from that meeting, or any comments or questions you have from the packet that has been provided to you.
Any questions?
One question, unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend the meeting. The last few years, I have tried and made the meeting, at least a portion of it. I was on a plane while the meeting was going on. Anyhow, what was the attendance look like this year? Every year I know it's almost the same. A small portion of community shows up, participates.
Yes.
What was the ratio?
Committee member Vice Chair Avedissian, we had 14 attendees in this meeting, and we had 4 public comments, but staff had sent out 2,600 mailers to a demographic area of our residents. We had done all of our outlets as far as the GW6 TV, all sorts of outlets that we had. For example, our newsletter, City Connections, social media outlets, and GTV6. So we have outreach to all of our Glendale residents to come to this community meeting. Staff is very well aware that for future, probably we will need to possibly change the venue or do different hours, do a couple of more outreach as the community meetings, so we could capture more attendance. But as of September 20th, we had 14 attendees in that meeting.
Thank you. That's exactly was my concern.
Yes.
That it's not for whatever reason people don't participate. I don't know exactly what the reason is and how much more the staff can do to. Next one is to beg them to show up. I mean, really, it's hard. I know it's hard on the staff that you guys do what needs to be done, but the people are not participating one way or another. But I would love to see some sort of additional effort, whatever it may be, I don't know, different media or medium to use to bring them in.
Incentive will be given to participants for the future. We've thought about maybe providing incentives, providing, we currently provide childcare, and we do provide snacks for our youth or children who accompany with their parents. But we're also thinking of, years before, we were able to provide raffle tickets for attendees. So these are options we're looking at, but unfortunately CDBG funding cannot be used for certain aspects of this outreach, but we're sure we'll be looking into providing and trying to assist different days and hours, and also provide possible incentives for the community to come in and provide their input.
One more question, if I may. All the notices go out with multiple languages, right?
Correct, yes, that's accurate.
Any other questions?
I was wondering if does it have to be in the evening?
Traditionally, we have always done it in the evening so we could capture people who are working to be able to attend their families and come in at 7 p.m. or in the later part of the evening. However, we recognize that we may be able to do different hours to capture different groups of the population in our community. So we are definitely going to be looking into providing different hours and different days and different venues. So that will capture different geographics of within the city.
The group that I attended, I had a sense that the evening is, most parents are two working parents, and then they have children at home and homework, and they're just exhausted.
Yeah.
Did we publicize on nextdoor.com?
We did not.
I would recommend that for next time. There's multiple neighborhood groups within Nextdoor,
Okay.
and a lot of people follow it, at least those people that I think are active in our neighborhoods. That doesn't mean it's the single solution, but I think it's one way to get to a pretty active audience.
Thank you.
Or some local TVs.
Besides the Glendale G6 TV?
Yeah. There's local TV, a lot of people watch it.
One of our councilmen is
Has his own show.
You would be happy to do it.
I'm sure. I mean,
Okay.
that was one of my thoughts, but I wanted to see what the staff comes up
I
with
think-
before we go to that route. But I think that would be another outlet. But that's only, unfortunately, there's only one segment of the population that is going to attract or give more information. I don't know if we have other options with multiple language programs that we can go into to promote it.
Very well taken.
I was just going to add to that, if we can add the local organizations to market or advertise within their immediate members, and or that there's such a thing coming up. Either we can have somebody from our staff go and represent a small forum and coming up at this date to this location, or I don't know, can we even split it out to different days, different groups, or we can't? I mean, does it have to be one shot, or for example, we can go to Korean organizations or Armenian?
Cost effective.
Chair Caribbean, I think it's not a matter of the number of meetings. I think the number of meetings comes down to staff resources and the amount of staff and time we have available to go, because we obviously don't want to hit one group of people and not be able to do the same for another. So that's the other thing we try to do, is be fair in how we outreach to all the various populations in Glendale. And so for purposes of the amount of time and staffing, because it's not just our staff, but there's also housing, community development staff from the housing section, and also some community organizations like Neighborhood Legal Services, who also come out to provide resources. The police department is usually there, because at these meetings we hear from people from the community on all various types of issues, not just those specific to what our department does. So it's harder to coordinate with all the various departments to be able to go out to different groups or different meetings. I think it would be ideal to be able to what I call piggyback onto an existing meeting of whether, that's some sort of a neighborhood watch or association group or some sort of a school PTA type meeting where the parents are already there. It's just difficult to be able to coordinate all the staff and the staff resources and the time it would take to go out to, 6, 7 different meetings versus have one larger meeting. I know we've had the meetings at like Horseman Elementary School in years past, and it seems like we've had a little bit more attendance. So I'm not sure if the venue also matters, because if Horseman is closer to, let's say, the population that
That's the one on
comes out.
Cerritos, right?
I don't think we've
not
ever done it
Cerritos.
at Sirius this time. We did it at Pacific Community Center.
The Horseman
Horseman?
Elementary, yeah.
It's on Garfield,
Garfield,
and
yes,
yeah,
yes.
it's one side's
Yes.
Garfield, the other side's Acacia. So we've coordinated with the school and had it at that site. We were looking at Maple being another option, Maple Community Center. It's just parking is horrible there. So when we try to think of the venues of where we could have these meetings, we also have to be able to accommodate the parking for people who want to attend. So if Maggie wants to add more.
I wanted to add, we have another option as well. It's just costly to do so, but we're also considering advertising in Aspares magazine and La Opinion to get those two populations to come in, as well as Glendale News Press, because we do advertise in Glendale News Press. But the feedback we're receiving is they're not really reading the newspaper. That demographic isn't reading the newspaper. They're getting their information from the mailers. So that's another consideration we're going to take.
Yeah, I'm sure that's, the reason I said that because as I was there with Ms. Ramirez at the meeting, and you mentioned the staff outnumbers the guests. And that's what happened, because you had us, you had the police department, the housing, everybody's there, and the guests was much less than, so. And it's because we put the effort, you guys put the time, the effort, all the preparation, and just don't want it to go to waste, so.
We agree.
But yeah, absolutely, advertising even local, I don't know, Telemundo, I don't know if he has a local channel or the Korean channels or the whatever, any of the channels, TV would get them, or the newspaper, as you mentioned. More marketing,
It's
more.
public announcement, so it should be free.
The Manila Times.
Yeah, the Manila Times or any of those, so.
What about homeowners association boards? Do we communicate with them? Because, again, those are active groups of people who have good networks. I really don't think advertising is going to be the
Homeowners,
solution.
we have done. We
yeah,
actually have
we-
done the
we sent that
homeowners,
out.
and we had homeowners representative at this
You
last
did?
meeting, yeah.
Which ones? Do you remember?
The ones on our list that we have for our nonprofits, we have a homeowners section as well, and we sent it out to everyone.
So the members of the Glendale Homeowners Coordinating Council, and then there's others besides them that are not members.
It's I mean, I'm not going to get into all of them, but like the Northwest Homeowners
Yeah, okay.
Association and all the others.
And yours. Yours too, because somebody was there.
Mine is yours.
No, mine, it's not mine. I don't get anything from that homeowners association.
I think in local TVs like ABC TV, and he brings sheriff department and they talk about city and a county. We should have somebody, same for Spanish channel, that somebody will go and explain to the Spanish people that what the program is, what the benefit is there for, that they can a lot of Spanish people can hear and tell each other and come in, or Korean or Armenian. I'm sure ABC will bring someone to talk about it, but other Spanish and Korean, they should do the same. To find somebody that want to help their people, they'll have some show on a TV and talk about it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Have we done any sort of online survey to solicit ideas?
Years ago, yes, community member Armenian, we had done a survey for the community in general, but in recent years, we have not done so.
It just might be one way to capture information where someone might not participate physically, but they might spend 10 minutes doing a survey.
If you can figure it out what census tract it comes from, the responses.
Exactly. We actually will be, because we're ending our 5-year consolidated plan, which includes the program priorities for 2015 to 2020. The next cycle is coming up, and with the next cycle comes a comprehensive community meetings, not just one. It could be numerous comprehensive community meetings throughout the city, and that's how we receive the new list of program priorities that the community members let us know about. And it isn't done by city staff. It's going to be done through an RFP process through a consultant, and consultants are pretty savvy when it comes to those types of assessments. So we'll probably look into how they're handling it and maybe following from that and learning from them, their best practices. We'll probably continue doing that as well. So we're looking into that as well with our consolidated plan that's coming up.
Well, then that wouldn't be handled through the CDBG funds.
It will be handled through housing and CDBG. It'll be done, it's going to be a joint effort.
Any other questions?
Good.
Let's move on to the next item.
Actually, Chair Caribbean, members of the committee, this is an action item, so we requested them.
Anyone wants to approve this?
Make a motion to approve.
Second, anyone? Anyone?
Okay. We're approving
The motion.
Wait, we
the
just-
report.
Yeah.
Program
Program
priorities.
priorities.
I second.
Okay, thank you. Committee members, Armenian,
Yes.
Avedisian,
Yes.
Caribbean,
Yes.
I'm sorry, I should have said Kazarian. Kazarian,
Yes.
Ramirez.
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Next item.
Thank you. Next is 4B3, transfer of $740,000 from the homeless housing project to the fiscal year 2019-20 Pacific Park Artificial Turf Multipurpose Field Project. At A is a motion to approve the transfer of $370,000 from fiscal year 2016-17 and $370,000 from fiscal year 2018-19 homeless housing project funding, totaling $740,000 to the Pacific Park Artificial Turf Multipurpose Field Project.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, this report regarding the transfer of a combined $740,000 from the homeless housing project in fiscal years 16-17 and 18-19 to the Pacific Park Artificial Turf Multi-Purpose Field Project for the installation of artificial turf, replacing the current natural grass on the baseball field. Originally, the CDBG committee had approved a total of $740,000 for the purchase and rehab of about 12 to 15 unit apartment building for permanent supportive housing. However, several sites reviewed did not meet requirements for the homeless housing project. Also playing a factor is the lack of affordable housing stock. And on the administrative side, we have strict guidelines for CDBG, and HUD expects us to spend down project funds in a timely manner, and we haven't yet done so with this project. Another cause is home funding for the housing department, which was proposed to be leveraged money that was going to be included with this project with CDBG. But it is currently being redirected. Those home funds are being redirected towards another affordable housing project. So this is again causing a delay for this particular project. Staff is proposing a transferring of funds to the artificial turf project and revisiting this homeless housing project as an option for funding in future fiscal years. The artificial turf project would allow a heavily used baseball field, which is over 15 years old, to become multi-purpose. So it'll not just be baseball, it'll also include soccer and other activities. The field goes through costly renovations each year due to overuse and drainage issues because it is natural grass. This project will allow savings of over 1 million gallons of water for irrigation, and it'll eliminate fertilizer use, herbicide, and pesticide usage. So when complete, the field will allow for year-round usage rather than the current 8 to 9 months of use, because 3 to 4 months out of the year it's downtime for resting and renovation. The total project cost is estimated at $2 million to $2.5 million, but the funding will also come from Park CIP funding, special revenue funds, and development impact fee funds. I've also included in your report, there's an aerial view of the site, if you'd like to take a look at that. And if you have any questions, please let us know.
Questions?
I do have a question, as always. I know that we have some time, as you mentioned, we have some time that we need to use the funds. What is the actual time, and when does it start? I think it was 5-year turnaround or 3-year turnaround.
It's actually, well, we're already red flagged because one fund is from 16-17 fiscal year, which is $370,000. The issue is we can't have more than 1.5 times our entitlement. So when our next entitlement comes, and if $740,000 isn't spent down, including the entitlement, we're going to be red flagged. And then when we're red flagged, the following year HUD can probably take that money back, and we don't want that. We'd rather let it be used for another project and revisit the homeless housing project in future fiscal years. So we're trying to be a little creative in a sense, because it doesn't seem to be happening right now with the sites that are in question. They're either not enough units, they're just not available, or they're too expensive.
One more question, if I may. How much is you said the project that's about $2.5 million?
Between $2 million and $2.5 million estimated.
To renovate the grounds from the grass to turf. It's quite a bit of money to renovate the ground. What, are we short of any money? Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. You can.
Go ahead.
Chair Garibi and members of the committee. Basically, a regular brand-new artificial turf field would cost about $2.5 million. We have the field here. We just want to update it or renovate it and have a artificial turf U12 field. That also includes expanding and increasing the footprint of the field itself into the picnic shelter. So it's not only taking out natural turf, it's taking out the natural turf, putting the correct drainage, artificial turf it, and expanding it into the fire lane with some additional landscaping around the entire ball field. We're estimating between $2 and $2.5 million. So there's more work than just taking artificial turf out and laying down artificial turf. I'm sorry, taking out the natural turf and taking out, installing artificial turf.
Okay. I'll wait.
So a few different questions. This has been one of the reasons I've been raising this every year, because the city council keeps putting aside money, taking it out of the nonprofit hands and putting it into this fund. Meanwhile, the real estate prices have been going off the charts. So I don't see that situation changing anytime soon because of the lack of stock. We're about 2 million housing units short in the market in California. So I think we should have a discussion on this committee before we consider whether or not we continue with this sort of predesignation of funds for that purpose. I agree with the council's intent, but it's not going to solve the problems, and so it really comes down to Measure H funds and how this works with that issue, which we know we're not getting our fair share of compared to what we're putting in as a city. So I think there's a bigger picture we need to take a look at, not just say, let's just bump it forward, 1 year, because I don't want to keep taking $370,000, for example, out of, our nonprofits' hands when they desperately need it. That's one. Second, a few questions regarding the actual proposal from staff, which is, to put it into Pacific Park. So we just, I believe, allocated money for the shade structure, right? I know the park itself and the community center is in the appropriate census area, but from what I've seen, because I've been to Pacific for many reasons, many times, as many of you have. It doesn't only serve the disadvantaged populations of our city. It's kind of a hub. It's a community hub, and it serves all sorts of people. So it falls within the right census tract. But if we're trying to use CDBG funds for things that truly serve disadvantage, I think we need to just be clear that we may do this project, but it's going to serve lots of people that have nothing to do with what the CDBG money is really meant for at the end of the day. So what I'd like to understand is, what else did staff look at besides this particular project as possibilities or options before you came down to this recommendation? Whether at Pacific Community Center or elsewhere.
Chair Harvey and members of the commission, we looked at multiple playground renovations down in South Glendale, one being Adams Square Mini Park and Wilson Mini Park. The playground life at those two locations, you can give it another 3 to 5 years. This area, we've applied for a number of grants through the U.S. Soccer Foundation, State of California, Prop 1 grant, and we were unsuccessful. And our goal is eventually to make this field artificial turf to serve both the baseball community, the Little League community, and the soccer community. Like Maggie mentioned earlier, it'll save us $1 million in water consumption per year. It'll save us thousands of dollars of staff time per year renovating the field, laser leveling it, and so on. If the CDBG Advisory Committee decides to reallocate the funds to other projects, we will move forward and use DIF funding and apply for Prop 68, which is a new funding mechanism that we're going to be applying for, and also Measure H, which is our LA County Parks Bond measure. So there are other funding opportunities. The reason why we had picked CDBG funding, because those funds are currently available, and we would like to allocate those funds to this project. But like I mentioned earlier, if the advisory committee is looking into funding other projects, staff will be open to your recommendations. We did look at using some additional money for the water play feature at Pacific, because we are short a couple $100,000, but we will look into our special revenue and different CIP funds that we have for that project.
Do you have statistics in terms of how this field is used and by whom? Because every time I've gone by, it's on adult soccer being played. So again, I go back to the funds are meant for a specific population, and while it sounds like a good idea, generally speaking, I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to it generally speaking, but if I'm looking at CDBG funds, which are intended for a specific part of our underserved population or those at risk, I don't see how this project, how creating an artificial turf field, like I don't see a clear connection between funds being applied and benefit being received by those at risk in our population. That's my one concern. The second concern I would have is that you're talking about $1 million of, let's say, water cost savings. Where's that money going to go? So just like I would when we talk about solar programs and what is that going to offset, and then where's that money from the offset going to go to the ultimate benefit, I think we have to look at connecting multiple dots. It seems to me like we're just trying to work up. I don't know where we are on our deadline. I mean, certainly if we're on a short deadline, we might not have the time to look into other options, and might have to go with something like this, or at least 1 year's worth, right, allocation, because each year puts it further out. So I don't know where you are with that, but that's or sort of information about the population that facility is serving, so that we can at least have some sort of connection between the decision we make and the ultimate population we're serving.
Committee member Armenian, sorry, did you? The field itself right now is open from 7 to 5 p.m. for drop-in use Monday through Friday. And Pacific Edison students, as well as local children in the area, use that field, and it's used pretty heavily for drop-in. Also, we have 3 seasons of day camp, and our day camps are in the summer for 10 weeks. We have our Thanksgiving day camp, we have Christmas, and I should say our winter day camp season and our spring day camp season, which is heavily used. That field is heavily used during those day camp seasons, and a lot of our low-income kids do attend that day camp. That is something to be to bring to your attention, as well as the homeless housing project is actually a pre-designated city project. So it's already been pre-designated for city funds, for city usage. So we're just taking a pre-designated city fund and bringing it into another pre-designated city fund, possibly if you allow it. So that's just something to think about.
Well, I'm not quarreling with you, but my general thing is I don't like pre-designated, generally speaking, as a matter of principle. I think it ought to be running through the scrutiny of this commission, but that's obviously not my decision to make. That's a city council decision. And in the past, when we've had pre-designated funds for things like code enforcement, I've spoken out against that, as has my appointing council member when he was a CDBG member, Mayor Zahir Sinanian, because exactly for that, in that normal budgets should be used for things that are normal expenses, and there needs to be financial planning for that. And so, again, I don't see the facility all the time, so that's why I'm asking the question. When I have seen it, I don't necessarily see that it's connected. It would be good for future purposes, to always have these sorts of proposals, especially with these sorts of dollar amounts. I think we need to be holistic in the proposal and always say, have a portion in this that shows the data and the evidence of how this is used for that, disadvantaged population that we're trying to serve, with these funds. They were pre-designated because they wanted to deal with the homeless population. Very clear connection, right, to the dollars. Here it gets a little bit blurrier, although I do trust, that is in the right location, and I know that facility is used heavily by disadvantaged parts of our population, but it's also used by non-disadvantaged parts of our population as well. It's really a community center. It just happens to be where it is.
Yes, Chair Garipia and members of the committee, the multi-purpose field that we're talking about in the report, 6 months out of the year, January through July, it's used by Vaquero Little League, and their members are from South Glendale, but 85% of them. And then we're hoping after the project is completed, or even currently now, we use the outfield for soccer. We have a number of youth groups that use both soccer fields till about 8:30 Monday through Friday, and then 8:30 till about 10 we have it open for adult groups. Saturdays and Sundays, it's a mix of both adult and youth soccer clubs. Most of the participants in our youth groups are from the South Glendale area. But when we do have a tournament, such as the Home Ornament Tournament or the Locker Center Tournament, we do have kids coming from all over the city and the SPA 2 region, from the San Fernando Valley, Burbank, San Fernando, and so on. But we are confident that most of the participants will be from the South Glendale or at-risk area. And when the facility is built, we will also have drop-in times where the community can come and use it. We will have our One Glendale sports program use the facility. We will have the school use the facility, and also the nonprofits in the area. That'll be Head Start, Salvation Army, Pacific Clinics, CCRC, and all the organizations that operate in South Glendale.
And if I may add, if we can just go back to the benchmark study one more time. We are in Glendale doing a pretty fantastic job of fairly funding nonprofits, as opposed to our partners our sister cities in the area. So, I mean, in that respect, we're almost funding 60% of the nonprofits with the CDBG entitlement funds. Other cities aren't even funding anything, so it's pretty commendable.
And that's the point I was going to make, that I thought there was a time in Glendale when we had no community centers down in those census tracts. And the big park that we had, we turned it over to the school district. We ended up with no parks. Right now, we are deficient, seriously deficient of parks in Glendale. So I'm all for giving any kinds of funds that we can to upgrade our parks, specifically in those census tracts that really need it. And Pacific is one of those that it is the highest and best use from what I've seen and what I've experienced there.
One thing to add also is the current artificial turf at Pacific was CDBG funded back in 2013-14. So the CDBG funds are well used at that facility. It is a busy facility, and moving forward with reports like this, we will have some data in terms of statistics and the types of organizations that use our facility. In regards to the question that Committee Member Armenian had, the 1 million gallons of water that we will be saving, of course, we'll save a large chunk of utilities, which will offset our utility bill. We currently overexpend on our utilities, both water and power, so it will help us out. We're over a couple $100,000 a year in utilities in our general fund budget, and hopefully by saving 1 million gallons, that can help us reduce our utility deficit.
So is the natural turf is only on the baseball field?
Yes, the natural turf is on the baseball
And the
field.
actual soccer field is already artificial turf, but it's worn out?
It's not worn out. It was built in 2014. So that has another 10 years, about 8 to 10 years of life. We would like to take out the artificial turf on the the natural turf on the baseball field and convert it into artificial turf. That will include.
In addition to what is already artificial turf with the soccer field?
Yes.
Got it.
And that will add a U12 soccer field, so we can have
an extra soccer field.
An extra soccer field.
Got it, okay, I
So
understand.
6 months out of the year, we would use it for Little League.
Yep.
They have use of the field January through July, and then August through December, we will have it open for youth soccer.
And do we have to transfer those funds or lose them or be penalized? So I'll make the motion that we transfer the $740,000 to Pacific Park.
Was there any other questions before we go to the motion?
No, you can have more discussion.
But you guys are done. So let me put a couple of my senses in there. First, let's just go back before the park, obviously, the homeless
Sorry,
project.
Mr. Chair, if I'm correct, there was a motion made, so it needs to be seconded, and then we can have more comments, I believe. Is it correct?
I'll second it.
Just, I think Robert's rules, sorry.
So going back to homeless project, yeah, I wish we could do something, obviously, as Member Armenian mentioned, it's a small change, $740,000 doesn't get us far. Even if we would have get one single family, we could have put, 4 maybe homeless in there. And so it's very small, even though we could probably piggyback on some other funding, but time is against us, and we have to act. If not, this portion of it will go away. And that idea is to split it to 2 maybe and use the year befores and all that, but we're not getting anywhere. But I'm sure our council members already gave us the direction, so it's not, we have to also follow their direction. As far as the park, I have a few questions. One, the cost of maintaining the artificial on the football field so far, how is it the ratio on that as far as not being artificial versus just the cost of maintenance only?
On the artificial turf or natural grass?
Either or, I mean, comparing the two.
Comparing natural grass,
I mean, 50%, 10%.
probably 50%, we'll be saving a lot of money in terms of maintaining natural, artificial turf.
Because artificial has some maintenance cost as well,
It
right?
has
It's a
some
different
maintenance
one.
costs. We'll have a contractor come in, and they will groom the field 3 to 4 times a year. Each time they come in, it's about $1,200. They'll groom the field, stitch wherever it needs to be stitched, and we're good to go. The only maintenance that we would need is picking up trash after our facility, after the reservations. Natural turf, you would need to seed it, laser level it, worry about the drainage, mow every other week. So you're looking at about $25,000, $30,000, $40,000 in maintenance cost.
I know my daughter plays soccer, and every time I go to Grayson Park, that wet doesn't help me sit on the grass because it's wet from the night before, and I understand how it works. But as far as number of parks, we have 1.4 acre, if I'm not mistaken, compared to the population. I was reading on the every 1,000 people, we have 1.4 versus average in Southern California is 2.8.
Yes.
2.18. Instead of upping these new existing parks, how about going to a new park projects? I know it takes more money than 740, but it's a seed money, or can we?
Where?
Commissioner Garibian, President Garibian, Chair Garibian, members of the commission, we've looked at a number of properties, and real estate is very expensive, and I'm sure you two know, you're in the business. If there's a property out there, we'll be open to looking at it, and if it's feasible, with council's approval, we will purchase and build parks. Our goal is to, number one, maintain our parks, work with Glendale Unified on joint use projects, which we're doing now with our DIF strategic plan. And if there's a facility down South Glendale where the money can be used, both DIF and CDBG, staff will be open to looking at possible purchasing opportunities. We have looked at a number of properties the last, I would say, 6 weeks, and it's we don't have the money for it.
You mentioned utilities earlier, as far as saving utilities on the water and power. How much of it is water versus power? Is it percentage-wise, 50%, 40% on the Pacific?
I would need to get back to you on that. It's more water. We use more water. I mean, at Pacific, everything's combined. So we pay for the utilities for the library. That's inside the community center and outside. The utilities for the swimming pool, utilities for landscaping, and also the electrical.
Is the swimming pool heated too, or no?
The swimming pool is heated, but they do close end of September, so we turn down the heater. But maintaining, a swimming pool year-round, you're looking at $5,000 to $7,000, including utilities.
Solar project is an option?
Solar project can be an option at any of our centers.
Can you use some of the CDBG money for solar projects on that and save on utility as well?
You can.
Okay, very good.
Good idea.
So we have a motion, we have a second. Let's take roll call.
Sure. Committee members Armenian,
Yes.
Avedisian,
No.
Gazarian,
Yes.
Ramirez,
Yes.
and Chair Garibian.
Yes. Next item, please.
Next is item 4B4, review and approve the preliminary fiscal year 2019-20 CDBG funding allocation plan by funding category. At A is a motion to approve the preliminary fiscal year 2019-20 CDBG funding allocation plan by funding category.
Mr. Chair, committee members, this is the fiscal year 1920 funding allocation plan we are proposing to the CDBG Advisory Committee to approve, and then it will be presented to City Council for final approval at the November 6th council meeting. We would again like to draw your attention to the screen as we have the categories highlighted in yellow for your review. So we are estimating at 1.8 million. It's a conservative estimate that we're assuming that CDBG will allocate, HUD will allocate to us. We also have an unappropriated fund balance that's about $45,178 from completed projects that had leftover funds. That goes into a special fund that we hold for safekeeping just in case the allocation comes in short or not. For administration, that's the 20% of the entitlement, which is $360,000 that goes to planning and program management and operations. And then we have our 15% for public social services projects, that's about $270,000 we're proposing. And then if you look down at the capital and neighborhood improvement projects, it's about $1,170,000 that will be split between our pre-designated city projects, which would be $590,000 for the city project, which would include, if Iris, I could have you scroll a little bit down. So for the pre-designated city projects, it would include the Section 108 loan. That's the Essentia Access Center loan. We're going to be in our 7th year of that loan repayment. We're almost done. In 2021, we should be done with that loan. This year, it's at $240,000. That includes the principal and interest, as well as $350,000 that's going to be set aside for the Pacific Park Artificial Turf Multipurpose Field project that we had just discussed earlier in the earlier report. This will leave $580,000 for our neighborhood and community projects, the nonprofit projects for CIP, for capital improvement. That should bring us to about $1.8 million. I will say we are awaiting some news from Washington regarding where we stand with our CDBG entitlement. Currently, both the House and the Senate have approved $3.3 billion, the appropriations committees. We're just waiting because they've lagged a little bit, and now we're on a continuing resolution until December. So by December, we're hoping that it goes through and the president passes that minibus bill, which is called the THUD, which is a Transportation and Housing and Urban Development Appropriations Bill. And once that happens, we'll have news hopefully sooner than later regarding our entitlement. But again, it's the same exact entitlement, same exact amount that they proposed this fiscal year in 2018, which is $3.3 billion. That's why we're hopeful that it'll be around the same amount at $1.85 million, just like we got this year. If you have any questions about the allocation?
Okay, if I may, Mr. Chair, looking back again on the pre-designated funds, the Pacific Multipurpose Artificial Fund, in an additional $350,000, above and beyond the $740,000 that it was just approved. Not me, but the committee has approved.
Yes.
That
Okay.
includes you, whether you know it or not.
Yes and no.
It's in the middle.
Yes. Okay.
Any other questions?
On the pre-designated programs, the homeless is out. The homeless projects are out.
We are, yes. It's not out, it's being reconsidered for next fiscal year as we see what happens with our home funds. Our housing department has home funds, but because of the housing crisis that we're in, they're diverting their funds to affordable housing for low-income families. And that's where that money is going. Hence, we couldn't capture that money to add to our homeless housing project. That's really what the concern was for us, because it just seemed that that's what the trend was. They're going towards using that funding for affordable housing for low-income households, rather than, I don't want to say rather than the homeless, but for a certain other population at this time.
That would kind of square with what Member Armenian was saying about, let us consider these pre-designated funds.
No.
Well, for the council to reconsider.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a few questions. Just a couple just for clarification. So what you're proposing for social services, 270, is less than what we allocated last year, correct?
Well, it's not, it's less than because we're assuming that we get 1.8 million, but we also have that, if you notice, we have the unappropriated fund balance, which is 45, scroll up, I'm sorry, just if you can scroll up, Iris.
The uncommitted 45?
Down, I'm sorry. So we have $45,178 in
That you're
unappropriated
leaving
funds.
as a,
That's our cushion. So
Cushion.
that'll be our cushion if we don't get the 1.85.
and if we do get it, where's that 45 go?
It'll go into the whole pot again. And then-
General,
right.
and then we can decide between the two,
Well, you.
categories?
No, you have to do the
depending
percentages.
on which one, yeah, okay. Okay, second question is, so on pre-designated, do we have any say in that or no?
It's actually a city council directive at this time, but we can take it to city council if you have concerns.
So the 350 for the artificial turf is a city council directive?
No, not the artificial turf, a pre-designated city project, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, how are the amounts decided is what I'm getting at.
Well, we decided we used a historical perspective, and that's sort of how we did it. After we had to take out the Section 108 loan repayment, because that's
I know,
just,
but is it
there's
based
no
on a
squeeze.
dollar amount or is it based on a percentage?
We can change it if you'd like. That shouldn't really be a problem. It's actually just based on what we had last year, and we were just trying to be as fair as possible.
I guess I'm going back to, probably a concern that Member Avedisian also has. I mean, we just allocated $740,000 to it from the homeless project.
That's what
And now we're adding another $350 to it. I understand that the overall project's like $2 million, right?
yeah.
If you just look at the
It's $2 million.
utility savings, you're gonna save $1 million, so you'll quickly get back to even on that in terms of the overall cost of running the operation. So I go back to my original question from before. How are we determining that the artificial turf project is the highest priority project, even within the pre-designated funds category? Or is what staff is saying is that is the top project, and you're trying to round it out with as much funds to get it done?
We feel that the artificial turf project will have the most use and serve the youth population, adults, children. So we're looking at it kind of in a sense that the most use it'll get, thousands of people will get to use it annually. It'll be used over 15 years, we know that. And we're considering those factors. At this time, unfortunately, because of our time constraints with HUD and the homeless housing project, we felt that this would be possibly the fastest way to get a project done if we have a good amount of funding and moving it forward as a CIP project. So truthfully, that's where it's coming from. It's the time constraint that we have.
So my concern is that, we're going down on public services, social services by about $8,000. We're going down on the capital projects, right?
Well, I do want to reiterate, this is an estimate.
I know, but
We're
it's more
expecting
than
more.
your cushion is what I'm saying. Because you're going down, right, from 653 to 580 on undesignated community projects.
Right. But we're anticipating, we're hopeful that we'll get 1.85 million. So if we get that, everything else goes up, just like we reprogrammed last year, just like we allocated last year. We're just assuming we won't, just to be conservative. So that number could go up for the
Also go
neighborhood.
down. We just don't know, right? Sure. So, anyway, I'm concerned that the only one really going down is, the social service and the capital projects. While the pre-designated is pretty much staying whole.
Like
except
other
20
cities.
20 grand.
Pretty much like other cities are doing.
Yeah, but we're not other cities.
In fact, we're,
We're better than other cities, so we want to stay better.
our parks
Sorry,
are way
Mr. Chair.
behind. Our parks are way behind, though, so.
Parks are way behind, but changing a turf, grass to turf, is not going to expand the parks. We're not adding on any parks. If we were adding on new park projects, new properties, it's completely, I would be 100% for it.
It's highest and best use.
Yes, but then again, we're using it already. It's nothing new. And now another 350,000 that they're
You
suggesting.
can't buy another park for, that's
We're
the
paying
problem.
50% of the park, the remodeling of the park or replacement of the field. Is the CDBG, the community, underserved community, is the 50% using more than a 50% of that property? I don't know.
No different than any other program that we
No,
that we
it's a little
fund.
bit different. It's a little bit different, I believe. But I don't want to argue. It's not the
Why
point. There's no
not?
point in argue. We'll do that later.
We'd also like to bring another thing to your attention.
Chair Garibian and committee members, I just want to reiterate back to a question that Committee Armenian mentioned. In regards to last year, having a little bit of a higher dollar amount, we had reprogrammed funds in there. I don't recall if it was 98,000 or not,
It was
but it did add into.
99,000 something.
Okay.
No,
89,000.
$89,680.
So that's why you see a little bit of a cushion from last year. This year, we have about 45. It seems like it's 45,178. So depending on the percentages, how big we could do that. I just want to mention that.
Any other questions?
One more question. If in case, and hopefully will, we get the 1.8, was it 8.5, hopefully we get that funds. With that, yes, the incoming funds are going up, but if we, I believe that's how it works. So our calculation of the all the costs, the 15% administrative, 20% administrative, 15% public schools, that percentage goes up too. So correct? So and the pre-designated costs, I think those are automatically goes up also.
It
so
will.
It really washes up. So
But if you'd like, we could take that fund and put it all towards capital, if you'd like, for the nonprofits, if that's what pleases the committee.
the additional funds, if it does come
Absolutely.
in, the
And we
500
can-
extra.
And we can
See?
leave it at 350, if you're comfortable with us leaving it at 350,000 as it is, and if the allocation comes in at 8.5, we could take the capital improvement money and put it into the neighborhood community CIP projects. And that way you will have more being given to the community projects than the pre-designated city project.
And do we have to decide on that now, or should we wait till we see what number comes in?
Well, currently, and we're going to get to our next item on our agenda, currently, we're going to leave it at 580,000 because it's an estimate. And when we have our RFP go out in November, we doubt that we're going to get any news from Washington at this point. We didn't get any news from them until May last year. But what we can do is we can come back in February. If we get the entitlement, we will, once you make your funding recommendations, we can include that number into and plug it into the neighborhood CIP projects. We could absolutely do that because our RFP is just an estimate. That's all it is, and our agencies know that.
All right.
It could be more.
Any other questions? No. We marketed to new agencies this year, right?
Absolutely.
So how
99.
many? 99. So we don't know yet how many is going to come back.
We had our CDBG open house meeting. You were actually there, Chair Garibian. We had 13 agencies in attendance. We shall see in November when we have our technical assistance meeting, but we are going to do a major media blast, just like we did with the open house, and we're hopeful that we get more proposals in this year than last.
So if that happens,
We'll need it.
I guess all these will be extremely shuffled, not just a little bit, and so I don't know if you want to leave more cushion or redo the numbers, or, because if we get even 2 new ones, I'm not saying 10 new ones, and not knowing if it's going to be a CIP or not, those numbers tremendously will change. Then we're going to have a very difficult time either hurt the other ones that they've been around, or refuse the new ones, or, so I sort of, because council gave us direction to market to the new agencies, and we are going to get them, and we don't know how many. But even if I get one even, and it's a one CIP for 50,000, it's going to throw out a lot of these numbers. So I think, I don't know, approving this as is, it leaves us to, it's such a, I mean, yeah, 2 years or 3 years we had consistent, but now it's a different ballgame. I'm not comfortable approving this unless we have some conditions or provisions or something saying 90% could change, for example. I'm just, something that order.
But that's what's in front of us.
I know, but I wish you guys had considered that new number that could come possibly. But it's not there, and we can't change it today. That's one of my main concern. Obviously, what you have done, great, is compared to the years before and the fundings and all that, I understand. And as far as the pre-designated project, you're saying it's coming from the council, so that's not much to discuss that. As far as whether it's Pacific Park or even, as I mentioned, maybe solar on the Pacific Park, but the turf as a whole, 2 million, right? We got 740, we're short million too. Another 300, so we're short 50% will be allocated, another 50 probably comes from different funding. And I don't think it's a project could be broken down into phases, the Pacific Park project. It's a one-shot cost as far as turf is concerned. So I don't know, this is what we have, but yet definitely comes December and your applications are sky high, then we have to really evaluate all this stuff. But for now, this is what we have, I guess.
Yep.
All right, let's move.
One more question, sorry. I'm giving you a headache too much. Can we approve portion of this, subject to,
No.
or?
Unfortunately, because we have to go to council in November 6th, we have to present this to council, and we have to have the packets ready for our RFPs to go out to the agencies. But if, again, I wanted to redirect you to the community projects from fiscal year 17, 18, and then 19 as we're proposing. They have gone up significantly, and we're hoping that they continue to go up. It went from $434,000 in fiscal year 2017 for neighborhood projects up to $653, and just like Armina had mentioned, we had that transfer,
Yes.
of 89,000. So again, we're almost at 600,000 once we get the last and final allocation. We're still pretty healthy. I believe it's pretty fair. It's about 50-50 at this time. But again, we can always take it to council and see how they feel.
Well, I make a motion that we approve the 2019-22 request for funding proposal as submitted.
Second?
Roll call, please.
Committee members Armenian,
Yes.
Avetisian,
Yes.
Kazarian,
Yes.
Ramirez,
Yes?
and Chair Garibian.
Yes. Next item.
Next is item 4B5, review and approve a fiscal year 2019-20 request for funding proposal, RFP, for public social service projects and CDBG funding application. Item is a motion to approve a fiscal year 2019-20 RFP for public social services and CDBG funding application.
Mr. Chair, committee members, you have before you 2 draft copies of the request for proposal packets with instructions and funding applications. If we may combine agenda item 5A and 6A, because one RFP is for public social services for $270,000, and the other RFP is for our capital improvement projects for $580,000. Again, these are estimates. Until we get our final funding, we won't know exactly what the numbers are. But I wanted to bring to your attention that these packets include the instructions, submission information, pre-qualifications, general requirements, and program priorities for Glendale. And included in the program, included are the program priorities Armina had discussed earlier, the new ratio calculation requirement for fiscal year 1920 will be included in section 3 of the pre-qualifications for both packets, so we've updated our RFP packet for that. Now, we also wanted to include language from staff comments at the August 13th meeting of the CDBG Advisory Committee regarding consultant fees for grant and proposal writing that came into question. I believe it was committee member Armenian who had mentioned that. So we reached out to our HUD field office for clarification and wanted to add the following language in both packets. And again, this is a draft copy, so it's not in the packets yet.
Where are you referencing?
Oh, it's not in the packets yet.
Oh.
We're considering
Got
it
it.
because we'd like to get your input. And the way we would like to word it is, if an agency chooses to hire a consultant to write a CDBG grant application, those fees are considered a disallowed cost. If you'd like, I can repeat it. Would you like
Well,
me?
maybe if you can get some background about why you're proposing this kind of, I'd made the original inquiry. We haven't discussed what the results were, so that might help
And the
put some
results-
context.
And the results of that inquiry from the August 13th meeting was, we had reached out to our HUD field office, and I had emailed the gentleman and asked him if proposal and grant writing, a consultant who does proposal and grant writing can get paid out of the CDBG allocation. It's not, it's a disallowed cost. And it is up to the agency to pay out of their own budget, if they have one, regarding that. But they cannot use their CDBG allocation for consultant fees, for grant writing and proposal writing.
If I may ask, there were 2 parts to the question that answers one part of it. Part 1 of the question was whether or not a consultant can be compensated based on, like a pay for performance, meaning based on a percentage of allocation given. It's separate from where the funds come from. So there's 2 ways you could pay a consultant. One is you pay them a flat fee, project fee, or 2, you can pay them a project fee, I suppose, and give them a pay for performance, meaning if your proposal is so good that it gets additional funds, will compensate you a base fee plus a percentage of that. That's a separate question. Then the question you're answering right now is, whatever way you set it up, whatever arrangement you have with a consultant, can you pay for it from the funds received from HUD? Your answer is you cannot pay anything to any consultant out of funds received from HUD. But what is the pay for performance question's answer?
They don't have it in the HUD language. They've never even heard that. So they don't have anything in the HUD language that states that. And that's really what he told me. He said, well, it's a disallowed cost. So I don't think they even elaborate on it, because if you're not allowed to be paid for the flat consultant fee, then why should you be paid for a
In other words,
percentage?
you could set up whatever arrangement you want as an organization, but you're going to pay for it out of your own pocket.
That's on you.
Yes.
And then the third question not asked that I'll ask today is, how do we monitor to ensure that funds received from CDBG are not used?
Committee member Armenian, we do annual monitoring, and any project pre-implementation cost is a disallowed cost, both for pretty much we're talking about capital improvement projects because social services projects does not have much of pre-implementation. It's just their programs that they're running, and all program costs are mainly approved for social services programs. As far as capital improvement projects goes, any soft costs prior to construction or any type of pre-implementation plans, being the architect fee, being any plans, permits, all those fees are basically paid through the agency or the person who is in charge of the grant. I mean, mainly the agency pays for that out of their own pocket. Capital improvement projects will solely pay only for construction,
So
nothing else.
to use an example, YWCA, they hire an architect, they're
Right.
going to do whatever renovations. All the costs for that architect are paid solely through other funds that YWCA has.
That's
The
accurate.
CDBG funds go for the actual construction costs.
Solely for construction. And when we go out there to do our annual monitoring, we do look at our earmarked CDBG funds, and I do look at to see, their general ledger, their statements of what those fundings have gone through. We also do, our pay applications are attached to the construction and the amounts spent for each line item. So it's line item by line item. I want to rest assured the committee members that we do quite intensive monitoring and also look into where our funds go and how it's paid out to. And we typically, the last 14, 15 years that I have been doing capital improvement projects, we've never paid any pre-implementation fee or any consultant fees.
I guess the last comment I'll make on this is, as we're thinking about the language that we put in, so I think the language, hopefully you can repeat it, but sounded good to me, although what I would like to know as people file their applications is whether or not they did use a grant writer, just as a yes or no question.
All of our applicants?
Yeah, whoever is applying for a grant application, if they're using an outside consultant to write the application, it
We
would
would like
be,
to know.
yeah, just good to know that they are doing so.
You mean moving forward 1920?
Yeah.
So you
Not
would
the
like that
past.
in our applications?
No, we're talking about the applications here.
Yes.
The future applications for 1920.
Okay.
So we're talking about language within this application, so that's what I'm talking about.
In your financial statement, when they submit that, they have to break down where they spent the money. They would have to include in there if they used it for consultant services, right?
But it's pretty, I would assume it's pretty vague, so we wouldn't be able to pinpoint, especially a larger organization, we wouldn't be able to pinpoint which consultant and for what are they consulting, because they could have multiple consultants doing different work.
We do ask our agencies to provide us the pre-implementation cost and line budget item for each, the architect. We've never came across a grant writer fee because that's not something we looked into it. We have always asked for the soft costs such as permitting, architectural plans. Those come hand in hand with construction. As far as writing the grant, we've never asked, but that's something certainly we could put that in there. They should put that as a budget line item, as a pre-implementation plan, and that cost will be strictly provided by the agency.
So we should clearly note that. That's my opinion, at
Yes.
least.
I believe it's actually in the RFP in the CIP section on, I believe, the last page, 22. So if you look at page 22 of the RFP for CIP, if you go down to about the 6th or 7th.
Yeah. So this has been in there for a while?
No, I
Oh, this is
actually
new.
included it
Okay.
because of the discussion
Right, right.
in August.
Yep, appreciate that.
So that's questionable, that's just questionable.
Any other questions?
Is there any reason why you thought it was something that we should be looking at?
Well, this is just my opinion. I think it's completely acceptable to be paid a fee for writing a grant proposal. What I do not like, and which is what I stated before, I don't like the optics of pay for performance, meaning like some sort of bonus based on amount received. The optics of that to me is not good, because what that encourages the grant writer to do is more than just write a very good grant. That may encourage them to start lobbying, which is where we get into kind of gray area. So I don't think we should be incentivizing that kind of behavior by doing a percentage, those sorts of people getting a percentage of, because that just makes them want to make sure that the organization gets that percentage, because they are going to be getting more compensation based on it. So I just don't like when it goes from project fee, meaning you're writing a proposal, which is very common practice, to getting a percentage of amount allocated, because I think we're incentivizing the wrong thing when it's not we, the organization, because we're not paying for it either way, but it's creating an optics that I don't like. We can't control it, because at the end of the day, it's as you determined from your inquiries, it's the organization's prerogative how they want to set up their compensation model. But I would not look favorably upon that, just because it just, like I said, incentivizes the wrong kind of behavior.
That's very good.
Anyone else? Any questions?
Question?
Just a couple of items, these packets, before reading page by page, like anything major change this year compared to the last year?
It is the ratio calculation tool that's been included. We're also going to be including the grant writing language, and that's pretty much it. Those are the two items that we discussed this year.
As far as the grant line item I see here, I don't know, in general speaking, of course, got to put more thoughts to it, but if they're not using the CDBG funds, turn around and say, hey, the deal I have with my grant writer, what's it to you?
Well, it's the same thing as the architectural fee.
Architect actually gets paid from it.
No, not from, no.
No, no architectural fees, no plan fees, no design fees or permit fees are allowed. Solely construction, any construction and material, basically construction includes the material, any total construction cost is paid out of the capital improvement projects. Any other soft costs, such as, for example, we have spec writers. After we get the capital improvement projects, when they get approved, our agencies either have to write their own specifications, or they have to rely on an architect or a type of a grant writer or a spec writer for us to have that information or to help them out. Our agencies usually outsource that information or that service, and they pay for those services through an architect or a spec writer. But those are all considered soft costs according to HUD. So we don't pay for any of that.
As far as putting that language in, is that the language you're gonna put in, the one sentence you got from HUD, or we gonna change that, or as a disclosure or disclaimer?
I think since it hasn't really been brought up before and historically, I think this line is good. We will also include the, in the budget line item regarding if they do have a grant writer, if they've used one, they can include that, because that's a disallowed cost. We do include, we have that allowed, and we can at least take a look at their budget when they submit their proposals, and when you take the proposals on, you'll notice that as well. So we'll include that as an example.
I had a couple of clarifications on either one of them. On page 3, regarding the last paragraph on the applicants, to submit copies of official board meetings, and I think we should make sure that they are the minutes. Because,
Which page are you on?
Page 3.
Of which one?
It says official board
I think
meetings.
the social services,
That
the
we have
social
the
services.
minutes, because I think he pointed out last year that a couple of organizations submitted resolutions
Yeah, that's a good point.
and required that they,
We will definitely
our
bring
own.
that up at the technical assistance meeting.
and then I had another one on payroll. which I think might add to the, why,
Committee Member Ramirez, I think I know what you're going to ask. Are you asking about
Where
the
is it?
social,
Where
the
is-
social security numbers? We will definitely tell them to omit those, the
well,
private
in the way,
information.
the way it's written here, it's document for each employee, and I think that's why we're getting all that information that they don't, then shouldn't be given out to us. And so if you get rid of that language, I think that is what's confusing to some of our organizations.
We'll definitely do
What
that.
section is that?
It was on payroll.
Page, what page is
What,
it?
what, page 4, where it says the verification of quarterly state and federal payroll tax payments,
See.
including,
See second
Page 4.
paragraph on page 4.
yeah.
Item C.
Yeah, on page 4.
So you're on CIP, okay.
And you might have the other one, it might not be the same one. And it says, including supporting source documentation for each employee covered by the grant. And I think that that's why we're getting that information that they shouldn't be providing, when all they need is the receipt, the actual one document that they file that gives the totals for everybody. I think that should cover it, so that we don't run into that again.
We'll definitely note that.
Lastly, we did the tour of the agencies last time with, and can we have a date or before, I guess, the application's date?
We need to decide this first, right? We need a motion on this first.
Yeah, let's move on.
With the decent vehicle.
What?
With the decent
Yeah.
vehicle.
Okay, a motion on this one.
I make a motion to approve both the CIP and the social services application RFP documents.
Second?
Roll call, please.
Sorry, who did the second?
I did.
Thank you. Committee members Armenian,
Yes.
Avedisian,
Yes.
Kazarian,
Yes.
Ramirez,
Yes.
Chair Caribbean.
Yes. So we combine the agendas, I guess there's nothing else on it? Okay, very good. So now my question was on, can we set a date for that before, because we're almost November now? To visit the agencies.
Speak up. Speak up.
We're going to wait for, we're going to go to staff comments. and we're gonna-
Sorry, I got lost. Item 5, committee staff comments.
Now ask it again.
You guys have any comments, or should I?
One more time.
All right,
We
one
didn't
more
hear you.
time. So, we visited the agencies in the past for the projects and to see if we can set a date to visit again, and if all the members are available that day, it'd be great. We can even use 2 cars if we won't fit in one.
Absolutely. Please let us know, do you have a particular date in mind, like a day of the week in mind, so we can,
Day of a week, any
or a
specific
time frame?
Fridays are better for me.
Would a Friday work for everyone?
worst day for me?
Generally, I
My-
would think.
My schedule is on a daily basis, so we can change it as soon as I know what day it is. I can change it.
Flexible with the Friday?
Select.
Flexible with the Friday? What is the worst days for me?
Yeah, it's the best day for me.
And then do we have a schedule of meetings for
But
the
we could
coming?
find another date, we just have to look
Can
for
you
it.
can you include those next meetings in the minutes?
We will, definitely.
What month are we looking for?
I think beginning of November, so you have
Prior
enough
to
time.
submission of the
Right,
RFP.
yeah.
Some, November before Thanksgiving, but
Before
sometime in
Thanksgiving,
November.
yeah.
So why don't we do this? I would suggest we each email staff dates that work.
Any day I'm okay except Fridays.
Would the third week in November work for everyone?
Is that the
That's Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving week?
That's no, that's the fourth week in November. The third week in November?
Third week is Thanksgiving, maybe.
It's not the fourth week. It's always the fourth Thursday.
Third week of November,
I'm okay with
that's
that.
November 23rd. You're talking about
That's
Friday?
Thanksgiving.
any
No,
day
that's
but
Thanksgiving.
No,
Thursday.
it's
I
Thanksgiving.
like Fridays.
3. Okay, no, Thanksgiving
Between
is
12 to
22nd.
16.
I've checked.
That's second.
I would say maybe the 30th then, November 30th, because Thanksgiving is 22nd and 23rd.
Can
That's
do
right.
14, 15.
Oh, we can.
Okay, the third week is
4.
actually the
Thank you,
15th,
yes.
16th.
Okay.
Okay, I'm not losing my mind. I know that Thanksgiving's
Oh,
the
because the
4th
first is
week of,
Yes.
Anytime
the
between
only-
12 to 15.
The only day I could do that week is the Friday.
Because I didn't count that.
I think it might be easier to just send out an email to the committee
we can do
members
that.
and get a consensus on a
we'll
date.
get you a few dates.
I would recommend would recommend you use doodle.com because every person can put in their, and you just put in all the weeks, the dates, and they can just check which ones they're available, and you'll immediately see where we're kind of coming together. So you don't have to go through manual process. I'm
That's
just trying
pretty
to help
manual,
you.
actually.
It's a link. You'd sign up on Doodle and you put all the dates in.
works good.
Yeah.
Any other comments from staff?
I have a comment. Last week, when was it? Yeah, last Thursday, I think we hosted another with CDBG, I think funds, and hosted homeowners or apartment owners community meeting. It was, I believe,
Yes,
last.
Housing Rights Center, yes.
Yes, I attended there just to see again what's the community, how many people shows up, and what's somewhat the concerns or questions and stuff. Unfortunately, it was at the Pacific Park again. Unfortunately, there were 25 people that had RSVP'd. 6 people had showed up. Out of the six property owners that showed up, 2 of them actually they were renters, and by mistake they showed up. So there were only 4 people, and that's pretty sad for a community as large as this, and so many homeowners or property owners or apartment owners, and pretty much nobody cares or nobody showed up or whatever the reason is. I don't know, whatever reason is. So. If we're spending the time and effort and the staff time and everything else that we do to make sure our message, our programs, whatever gets successful or becomes successful and answers the results, brings the results, what we're looking for, what we're giving out. I don't know what it is, but we really, same as the other community meeting, we have to do something about it. We have to find a different venue, different ways, different means of communication. It was pretty sad. I walked in, I was hoping to see apartment owners. I was hoping to see a lot more. But when I spoke to the speaker, she said there was only 25 people's RSVP, and only 4 actual property owners showed up, which is...
State of our communities.
Committee member Avedisian and committee members, I just want to let you guys know that we had communicated to 2,200 landlords through our Section 8 program. All the flyers have gone out to that about 2,200 landlords. We had used our flyer sending out to all of our department counters. We've had really outreached quite a lot, actually. Both those workshops, one is in April for tenants and one is in November for landlords, is heavily outreached, both by Housing Rights Center and city staff, myself, and we collaborate with all of our departments to inform the community. Unfortunately, the turnouts are low, as you mentioned. So we have to look into see how we could gain and do more to have our community to participate in these events. But I just want to rest assure the committee
Nobody's
members that we do strive to reach out to, not in hundreds, thousands, whatever list and dissemination we have, we do that through all of our outlets, actually.
One more question, if I may. You mentioned that went out to 2,000 Section 8 property owners, landlords.
Correct.
So we have 2,000 Section 8 landlords, or it's just landlords?
Landlords in general.
General.
That would, yeah.
And some of them are Section 8 participants or not?
Correct.
Okay. Just want to make sure we have 2,000 Section 8s?
No, but
Yeah.
we have a list that we send our information at programs with collaboration with different departments to send out this information.
Any other comments?
I was wondering on the comments where it was raised that, that Latinos weren't getting selected, and, well, how can they? You know, we have all these many others, and these few were. So is there another way to do the lottery?
That would be a housing question that we can ask. I know they have their own criteria for Section 8, and I read the comments that they had. I think most of the time when people are desperate for affordable housing, they assume that there's favoritism or there's payouts or payoffs. But that's really not the case. It really is a criteria that the housing department has.
But I'm just thinking in terms
to get on the wait list.
When you do a drawing and you have, if I buy 100 tickets, my chances are better than the person that only has one.
Well, it's an application for a household, so one person in a household, at least I know, I think I can answer that one. It's the head of the household that applies for that lottery. It can't be all the members of the family.
I understand the lottery. I've actually participated in it. I mean, I've been a drawer in this meeting, so I know how it works. But when we have, when your population is weighed, and it almost, and people feel like we're being left out. Well, you're not being left out, but it's just that your chances are not as good because you're not as many. And in terms of maybe, is there maybe something that we could consider? Just because it was raised.
Is this for Section 8 you're talking about?
It's the, whatever, yeah, Section 8.
It's the affordable housing lottery.
Yes, and
I think
not our.
first of all, it's not, I think it's this committee's
yeah.
prerogative or anything that we can talk about here, regardless of what it is, the situations. I think if there is a concern, whoever has that concern has to present it to the housing department and housing authorities.
It came up at the meeting.
I'm sorry?
It came up at our meeting.
In our meeting?
No,
It came up at the community meeting on September 20th, and we
Oh,
had two
okay.
members of the housing department
Okay,
there.
then, yeah.
Actually, the assistant director of housing was there, as well as one of the supervisors. And I'm not sure if I know that they were going in and out of all the breakout sessions, and I believe he was in one of those sessions. So he did translate, or had a translator give
On
the
that particular
relay.
one, in the session I was in, it was just kind of raised and left there, and you don't want it to be left there because, you know, you want it, like you said, you don't feel that there's a bias of it. Just kind of an understanding, how can we do it so it's clarified?
Should pass the message to Housing Department.
Absolutely.
Our concern.
We will do that.
I just had two comments. First of all, congratulations to our new chair. Look forward to our next funding cycle. And building on Commissioner Avedisian's comments about participation, just want to remind everyone, and including those viewing, that November 6th is Election Day. Encourage all voters to vote your conscience on their many important issues on the ballot. So we have to encourage our citizens to participate in the democratic process at every turn. So I hope you'll include that in your TV show, too.
Absolutely.
And an
Already have.
excellent segue to that, November 6th is also our joint City Council Housing Authority meeting, where most of our items that you have approved will go to the City Council for approval. So it'll be on Election Day, November 6th. November 7th, we are anticipating our notice of funding letter that's going to go out to all of those 99 agencies that are out there. That's on November 7th. November 16th, we anticipate the release of the actual RFP packet with all this new wonderful
What was the
information.
date on that?
November 16th
Okay.
will be the release date of the RFP.
You'll email us, I assume. Can you email us all these dates?
Absolutely, we will definitely email you all this information. And on November 28th, it's our technical assistance meeting. We encourage all agencies to attend that meeting since we do have the new ratio tool calculation. And on December 27th, it's the deadline to turn in their RFPs. So agencies are encouraged to turn in their RFPs on December 27th before 5 p.m. And believe it or not, we come back February 22nd. That's our next meeting, most likely an all-day meeting from 8 to 5. And we may or may not come back on the 25th, which is a Monday. If we have numerous amounts of proposals. So if we can handle it all in one day like we did this prior year, that would be great.
Can you, because I think we should check our calendars, make sure.
It's going to be on Friday, February 22nd.
These were all dates that were approved by the committee previously.
Okay, can you email all those dates out?
Absolutely, absolutely,
Anybody else?
The 22nd and the Monday after?
If necessary.
I also would like to make, I'm sorry. Go ahead. That's it. I also want to make a quick comment that YWCA's project is going pretty well. We're in full construction. Anticipated completion date is going to be end of December. And we are planning on coordinating a grand opening ribbon cutting for this project with the executive director. We have met, and we're looking at last week of January on a Wednesday possibly. So we will send more information, but just keep that in mind. We would like you all to participate in that ribbon cutting and grand opening. So that project is very well moving forward, and we're hoping to complete it end of this year.
Excellent. I think they had their gala or fundraising recently, a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
Excellent. All right, we're good? Okay, we're going to adjourn the meeting. 4:52.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Turn these in? Do we turn these in?
We're still on.
It's off?
So just to clarify, the meeting is adjourned?
Yes.